Welcome to part two of lesson five, David Ricardo's theory of rent. David Ricardo was a British economist and politician of Sephardic Jewish descent, born in London. He made his fortune as a stockbroker before retiring to focus on economics and politics, eventually serving in Parliament, where he advocated for free trade and liberal reforms. Ricardo's most influential work on the principles of political economy and taxation introduced key ideas such as the labor theory of value, which explains that the value of goods is related to the amount of labor needed to produce them. Comparative advantage, which shows how people of countries benefit from producing goods they can make most efficiently. And economic rent, which is the extra income earned from owning land with natural advantages, such as fertile soil or a prime location. His theories were shaped by the events of his day and sought to explain the economic consequences of policies enacted by Parliament, most notably the Corn Laws. Enacted between 1815 and 1846, these laws were protectionist measures that imposed tariffs and restrictions on imported corn to keep domestic grain prices high at the time. The term corn in England referred to cereal grains, including wheat, barley, and oats. It did not include maize, the crop we call corn today, which was unknown in Europe until American colonists were introduced to it by the native peoples of the Americas. The purpose of the Corn Laws was to protect English landowners and farmers by maintaining high grain prices. While these laws benefited landowners, they were controversial because they increased food costs for consumers and sparked debates over free trade. Ricardo criticized the Corn Laws, arguing that they distorted market prices, reduced economic efficiency, and harmed workers who had to pay more for basic food. For all these multiple choice drop down menu questions, read each response and then pick the one that best answers the question. If you get it right, great. If you get it marked wrong and you don't know where to go, come to my Zoom office hours so we can discuss it and make sure that you get full credit. Ricardo's theory of rent was developed during the Napoleonic Wars when both corn and land prices were rising. Economic rent, as Ricardo defined it, is the extra payment made for land above what is needed to keep it in use. In simpler terms, rent is like a bonus paid because some land is naturally more productive or better located than other land. Importantly, rent does not come from labor or effort. It comes from the land's natural advantages. Ricardo described it as a premium for scarce resources, benefiting landowners without adding extra value to society. This idea emerged in early 19th century Britain, where population growth increased food demand. Farmers had to cultivate less productive land, which drove rents higher. Ricardo's insight was groundbreaking. By comparing more and less fertile land, he essentially explained the principle later known as the law of diminishing marginal returns. This law states that as more labor or capital, like seeds, tools, or fertilizers, is applied to a fixed resource such as land, the extra output from each additional unit eventually decreases. This naturally leads to rising marginal cost, meaning that producing one more unit of output becomes more expensive on less productive land than on highly fertile land. For example, on poor quality land, each additional unit of labor or seed yields less corn, raising production cost. On fertile land, each additional unit produces more, keeping costs lower. By linking land productivity to output and cost, Ricardo set the stage for modern microeconomics and understanding how marginal costs rise as production increases. Ricardo also addressed the key economic question of his time. Did higher land prices make corn more expensive? Or did rising corn prices increase the demand for land, pushing up land prices? He argued for the latter. Rent exists because some land has natural advantages, not because landowners create value. He defined rent as that portion of the produce of the earth which is paid to the landlord for the use of the original and indestructible powers of the soil. Today, Ricardo's rent can be seen as a type of producer surplus or differential gain unique to land, explaining why farmland of varying quality earns different returns. Understanding Ricardo's theory of rent is essential for analyzing how the natural characteristics of land affect economic outcomes. Rent arises from differences in the fertility or location of land plots, stemming from the original and indestructible powers of the soil. When additional labor and output, such as seeds, tools, or fertilizers, are applied to land, the extra output eventually diminishes, particularly on less fertile plots. This principle was later formalized as the law of diminishing marginal returns, which states that adding more inputs eventually produces smaller increases in output. From society's perspective, the supply of land is fixed. There's only so much land available, and it does not have a production cost in the way goods or labor do. Rent is therefore a surplus, meaning it is extra income that does not affect the price of goods. Ricardo anticipated this principle since his rent theory depended on the idea that output gains shrink as progressively less fertile land is brought under cultivation. His work provided a foundation for understanding the distribution of income between landlords, laborers, and capitalists, and remains a cornerstone of classical economic theory. Ricardo identified two main sources of rent. Scarcity rent arises because land has a fixed supply for a specific use, such as growing cereal grains, so its price is determined entirely by demand. When land's supply is perfectly inelastic, meaning no more land can be produced, all payments for its use are economic rent, with no part going to cover production cost. Differential rent occurs because of differences in fertility. More fertile plots produce more output than marginal or no rent land, generating extra income for the owners of superior plots. To visualize this, imagine a graph with price on the vertical axis and land quantity on the horizontal axis. The supply curve is vertical, reflecting land's fixed supply, while the demand curve slopes downward, and their intersection determines the rent price. Although today we can illustrate Ricardo's logic with graphs and equations, it is important to remember that he and his contemporaries did not yet use algebra, coordinate systems, or formalized models. Instead, they relied on verbal reasoning, numerical examples, and simple comparisons. Ricardo's insight into scarcity and differential rent were groundbreaking because they showed how rents could naturally emerge from market forces, even without modern mathematical tools. Modeling Ricardo's economic rent. As mentioned previously, Ricardo argued that rent arises because not all land is equally fertile. When different grades of land are cultivated, some plots will naturally be more productive than others. The most fertile land generates more output at the same cost, while the least fertile plots may barely cover production costs or even result in losses. In Ricardo's framework, blank is the surplus earned on more productive land compared to the marginal land, which is the least productive land still in use that just covers its cost but earns no rent. Enter a single word into this box that can be found in the text above. Land less fertile than the marginal plot would typically yield losses and would not normally be cultivated. Play and pause the following video to complete the next part of this lesson, rounding answers to one decimal place. To illustrate how differences in land quality affect agriculture output and cost, a key idea in Ricardo's theory of rent, consider the following example. Ricardo owns 4 equal-sized plots of land, each cultivated to grow wheat. Although each plot is 5 acres, 1 acre is slightly smaller than a football field's main playing area, measured from goal line to goal line, the soil quality differs across them. Under typical rainfall, humidity, and temperature, his most fertile plot, grade 1, produces 23.1 bushels of wheat per acre, with each bushel weighing about 60 pounds. The second, grade 2, yields 19.2. The third, grade 3, yields 15.3. And the least fertile, grade 4, produces only 11.4. The cost of growing wheat includes tilling, planting, harvesting, and delivering the crop, with a primary expense per acre being seed, which cost 110 shillings, 11 pence, and 2 quarter farthings. With each bushel selling for 7 shillings and 3 pence, the price of wheat is what? The cost of producing the crop is what per acre? Report both answers in shillings to 2 decimal places, since in Ricardo's time, prices were expressed in shillings, pence, and farthings rather than decimals. The cost of seed per acre is what? Well, in shillings, it's 110. We have to add to that 11 pence, and then we have to add 2 quarter farthings. According to this, 1 shilling is 12 pence, and 1 pence is 16 quarter farthings. So I'm going to type a 1 here, then I'm going to type equal 1 divided by 12 to convert the pence to shillings, and I'm going to type equal 1 pence is 16 quarter farthings, so I'm going to type equal 1 divided by 16 to convert the quarter farthings to pence, and then to convert the pence to shillings, I'm going to divide by an additional 12. And then what I need to do is I need to multiply this by that, this by that, this by that to get everything in shillings with decimals, and then I need to sum that. Well, there's a cool function in Excel called sum product. So I'm going to type equals sum product. And I'm going to highlight the first three numbers in column B. And I'm going to type a comma. Then I'm going to grab the next three in column C. And when I press enter, the 110 will be multiplied by 1. The 11 will be multiplied by the 0.08333. The 2 will be multiplied by the 0.005208. And those products will be summed. And I get 110.93 shillings per acre. 110.93 shillings per acre. As for the price of wheat, wheat is 7 shillings per bushel and 3 pence. Again, I'm going to type that with a 1, and then I'm going to type 1 divided by 12 here because a pence is a twelfth of a shilling. Then I'll just copy this and I'll paste it right here. Then I'll modify it. I'll bring the blue box down and I'll bring down the red box. And I've just converted shillings and pence to just shillings per bushel. And I'm using 2 decimal places. Now I need to complete this table. So I'm going to copy this table. And to copy the table, I'm going to grab a period outside of the table. And I'll grab Ricardo outside the table. And I'll press Control C. You want to press Command C if you have a Mac. Then I'm going to right click onto A13. And I'm going to choose as a paste option, match destination formatting. In this table, I added a new column, bushels per acre, with these being inputs to our model. And I added this row here, acres per plot, which is equal to 5 up here. The first plot of land, grade 1, produces 23.1 bushels of wheat per acre. The second produces 19.2. The third, grade 3, yields 15.3. And the fourth yields 11.4. To get total harvested bushels, I have to multiply the 23.1 times the 5. I want to pull this down, so I want the blue box to go with me, but I want the red box to stay frozen in row 13. So I'm going to put a $sign between the B and the 13, and then I'm going to drag this down. Total harvested of plot A is 115.5, 96 for the grade 2, 76.5 for the grade C plot, and 57 bushels for the grade 4 plot of land. Now, what's the harvest value in shillings? This is the number of bushels. If we're making 115.5 bushels of wheat on our grade 1 plot of land, we need to multiply that by the price per bushel. And the price per bushel in only shillings is 7.25. Now, I want to drag this down. So again, I got to put a $sign between the B and the 10 because I want the red box to remain in row 10. And I'll drag this down to get the rest of them. So let me type these values in there. So let's go 1 decimal place here. So we're going to make 837.4 shillings from the harvest on the plot that is rated grade 1. We're going to make 696 shillings on the plot of land that is grade 2. We're going to make 554.6 shillings on the plot that is of grade 3. And we're only going to make 413.3 shillings on the least fertile plot of land. I'm going to make this blue and make this blue. I'll call this price per bushel and then cost per acre. Now we need to get the cost of production in shillings. Each of these plots is 5 acres. We're going to multiply that by the cost per acre. I'll put $signs on both the 13 and the 5 so that when I pull this down, we'll be frozen in row 5 and 13. And then we need 1 decimal place. So the cost is fixed on each plot of land because we're using the exact same amount of seed on each acre of land. Some of the land is more fertile, resulting in higher harvest. Some of the land is less fertile, resulting in smaller harvest. So our costs of production here are identical across all 4 plots. 554.6 on each of these. Now the rent is just the difference in terms of the revenue from the harvest minus the cost of the harvest. So the rent for the 5 acres of grade 1 is 292.7. For the grade 2 plot of land, the rent is 141.4. For the grade 3 plot of land, it's 0. And then for the least fertile land, negative 141.4. Ricardo applied his rent theory to analyze the impact of the Corn Laws, which were designed to protect domestic agriculture. These laws forced farmers to rely on less fertile land, which in turn raised corn prices and rents, while reducing profits for capitalists and wages for laborers. Ricardo argued that high corn prices did not result from higher rents. Rather, they increased demand for land, raising rents. In other words, the corn laws increased the price of corn, which pushed up the demand for land, causing rents to rise. To counter these effects, Ricardo advocated for free trade as a way to lower both prices and rents. His ideas significantly influenced the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846. Modern application. Ricardo's rent theory helps explain how unearned surpluses from land and natural resources can be taxed in modern economies. A land value tax, LVT, inspired by Ricardo and later developed by Henry George, is one such policy. LVT focuses on taxing the extra value that comes from the land itself rather than from improvements made by the owner. For instance, land in a busy city naturally becomes more valuable because of its location and the surrounding community, not because the landowner has made it more productive. By taxing that unearned increase in value, LVT reduces speculation and provides revenue for public goods and services. Countries such as Denmark and Australia have adopted versions of this tax, showing that Ricardo's ideas still influence policy today. Another modern application of Ricardo's ideas is the resource rent tax, which is designed to capture unearned surpluses from scarce natural resources. These surpluses arise not because producers work harder or innovate more, but because the resource itself is limited and possesses natural advantages. For example, Norway imposes special taxes on oil companies to ensure that public shares in the profits generated from its limited oil resources. This approach follows Ricardo's reasoning that rents are not the result of extra effort by the producer, but of the resource's scarcity and natural advantages. By taxing these rents, governments can redistribute wealth from private firms to society, fund public services, and encourage more efficient use of finite resources, all without discouraging production. When thinking about today's property taxes, the connection to LVT, land value tax, becomes even clearer. Property taxes resemble an LVT because they are partly based on land value, but they also include taxes on buildings and improvements, meaning they can discourage productive investment. Some economists go further and argue that property taxes reveal a deeper truth. They effectively make landowners renters of their own land. Why? Because if you fail to pay property tax, the government has the legal authority to seize and sell your property. In that sense, the tax functions like a rental payment to the government, which acts as the ultimate landlord. This perspective challenges the common notion of private ownership, since ownership is conditional on paying the government's rent. By contrast, a pure land value tax would target only the unearned surplus from the land itself, leaving improvements fully in the hands of the owner. Despite these applications, Ricardo's rent theory is not without criticism. Some argue that land is not truly fixed in supply, since it can be shifted between different uses, such as farmland converted into housing developments. This means the supply of land for a specific purpose can be more elastic than Ricardo assumed. His idea that land is always cultivated from the most fertile to the least fertile is also unrealistic, because in practice, technology, markets, and policies influence which land is used. In addition, land productivity often depends on human investment, like irrigation, fertilization, or infrastructure, rather than just natural fertility. Ricardo also assumed that land's indestructible powers were permanent, but in reality, soil quality can diminish without proper care. There are also challenges to Ricardo's concept of marginal land. He claimed that the least fertile land in use earned no rent, or in his words, it generated no economic rent. However, in practice, nearly all land tends to earn some rent, even if minimal, because scarcity and location advantages often give land inherent value. This means that Ricardo's theoretical marginal land is somewhat of an idealization rather than a strict reality. Furthermore, modern economists have observed that Ricardo's principle extends beyond land. It applies to any factor of production that is scarce and inelastic in supply, meaning its availability cannot easily increase in response to demand. Examples include natural resources such as oil and rare minerals, as well as man-made assets like taxi medallions or limited licenses, which can also generate rents for their owners. This broader perspective helps students see how the concept of rent is relative in many areas of modern economics, not just agriculture. A city is considering two taxation options: a traditional property tax of 12% on the total property value, and a land value tax, LVT, of 12% on land value only. You own a building where the land is valued at $304,000, and improvements to the land is valued at $547,000. Whereas the land value tax would equal what dollars? The property tax would equal what dollars? To calculate these two values, I'm going to modify the spreadsheet on the right. In the spreadsheet, I added some rows down here. I got the value of building, value of land. I got the tax rate. I got the land value tax, and I got the property tax. The value of the building, $547,000. The value of the land is $304,000. Then we have assessed value. For the land value tax, the assessed value is just the value of the land. For the property tax, you have to sum both of these. The paid tax is what? This times the 12%, and this, the value of the land and the building, times the tax rate. The land value tax is $36,480. The property tax is $102,120. In summary, Ricardo's theory of rent laid the groundwork for modern policies such as land value taxes and resource rent taxes. A land value tax is closely connected to his theory because it aims to capture the unearned surplus generated by a piece of land's natural qualities and advantages. According to Ricardo, this surplus does not result from the effort of the landowner, but from the inherent scarcity and productive advantages of the land itself. While the assumptions of his model do not fully match the complexities of today's economy, such as technological changes, urban development, and globalized markets, his central insight that rents arise from scarcity and natural advantages continues to serve as a fundamental principle in economic thought. Understanding this connection helps explain why policymakers often target land or natural resource rents for taxation rather than taxing improvements or labor, which are tied directly to productive effort.